Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for inviting me to speak tonight. My name's Bob Witte and K0NR. I'm actually in Texas right now, but home is Colorado. And I'm going to be talking about VHF, UHF summits on the air. And really, I think there's three parts. There's a little bit about summits on the air in general, and then dial in on some of the things we do with VHF in particular, and then talk about some of my operating efforts. How far can you really talk from the tops of these mountains on VHF? And I think I'll go, probably less than an hour, and then we'll have time. We can take questions after that. And if you have a question, it's a small group. You can just holler.
Or raise your hand. Use the raise your hand.
Okay, raise your hands even better. Yeah, and if Dan, if you can kind of moderate that'd be helpful. You can use the chat window and all that too, right? So as I said, my name's Bob, K0NR from Monument. I've been licensed since 1977 when I took a ham radio license class at Purdue University. Got to get my Go boilers in there. And I'm an electrical engineer, and I worked for decades in the test and measurement industry. I'm pretty much retired, but I still do some consulting. And lately, I've done a lot of things in ham radio, but lately it's always kind of been this combination of VHF, getting up in the mountains, and just exploring in general. And I do like to write stuff. I've written for QST and CQ and other magazines, and I wrote this book, VHF Summits and More. It's available from Amazon, print and Kindle. Also, the CQ Communications bookstore carries it. So if you're interested in this kind of stuff, you might like that book. It's a pretty easy read. Okay, so we're talking about summits on the air, and really there's two ways to participate. You can be an activator or a chaser. Activator means you're on top of a mountain making radio contacts, and chasers are the people that are chasing the activators, trying to contact the activators. And you can do either one of those or both, and I think most people that get into it end up doing a lot of both. It's a worldwide program. It started in the UK, but they were wise enough to set it up so that it could be adapted and extended worldwide. And it's very popular in the US now. Pretty much every state has an association that supports SOTA. We'll look at a map of that in a little bit. There's a points and an award system. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because you can really get lost in the detail, but there's plenty of, certificates and trophies and stuff like that if you like going after that. In general, higher elevation summits get more points. The highest points awarded are 10 for a summit, and it's all based on elevation, but that's customized to the local area. So like a 10-point summit in Colorado is going to be 14,000 feet, whereas back east, like in North Carolina, they wouldn't have summits that high. So a 10-pointer is probably 6,000 or so. And basically the activation requirements are the summit must be on the SOTA list. There is a list of summits. You don't just go out to some random mountain. You go, check the list and make sure it's considered a distinct SOTA summit. You need to carry your equipment. There's no minimum distance required, but the rules are it should not be attached to a vehicle. So the idea is to try and keep it a little more person powered, maybe horse or goat powered, but not have it be a drive up event or activity. Although it is okay to drive to the top of a summit and then carry your equipment away from your car and set up. Portable power is required, no fossil fuel generators. So that's pretty much going to mean batteries, maybe supplemented by solar. And the main website is sota.org.uk. So keep that in mind. A few more rules. Again, not going to go real deep. The activation zone is 25 meters within vertical of the actual summit. So you don't have to be exactly on top. We'll give you a little bit of a leeway there. And there's not just any SOTA, any summit can be a SOTA summit. There's 150 meters of prominence. That's the typical requirement. It basically says the summit has to poke up about 150 meters. So that's 475 feet or something like that, and be distinct from its adjacent summits. To actually obtain points from activating, you have to complete 4 QSOs, and it has to be with 4 different stations. So switching bands does not count for an additional those additional QSOs. Repeater contacts are not allowed. Satellites are okay. Activators and chasers submit their logs to the worldwide SOTA database. There's quite the infrastructure that's been created to support this program. It's quite impressive. And so you go and you submit your log, and you accumulate points that way, and accumulate and qualify for awards. QSL cards not required. SOTA is really on the honor system, and as I said, lots of awards and certificates to go after. So where are these SOTA summits? So here's a map of the U.S., and it's kind of what you'd expect, right? You got the East Coast mountain ranges that go from Maine all the way down to Georgia. And then you've got the West Coast, Washington State down to California. Then you got the Rocky Mountains in the western states, Colorado, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, Wyoming, Montana, and so forth. And you think, well, maybe that's about it. But actually, if you look carefully, pretty much every state has at least a few summits. Even Iowa has 2 summits. And then who really gets left out? Kansas. Sorry, folks. No, there's no hills in Kansas that qualify. Same thing with Florida. Same thing with Rhode Island. So you can actually do this, anywhere in the country. You may have to drive a little bit to activate a summit, and of course you can chase from pretty much anywhere. Tonight I'm going to be talking about VHF. You can do HF, you can do VHF. I always say take your pick or do both. The thing about VHF and UHF, and this is what gets me interested, is it's all about height above average terrain. You're sitting in your backyard with an HT in your hand. You can maybe talk a few miles. You get on top of a mountain, and now you're talking 100 miles, or as I'll show you, even more. It takes just basic equipment. Everybody seems to have a handheld transceiver. You are more dependent on local chasers. You have to have somebody within range that you can work. And FM's the most common, but single sideband and CW are also used, particularly during VHF contests. And of course, this is a nice fit for technicians. Well, really any license class, but technicians can certainly play. The HF version of this is, I call it classic QRP operating, typically a small radio, a lot of CW, but also SSB. You're going to make longer distance contacts. You're going to make more contacts in general, right? If the band's open, you're going to be able to talk to lots of folks. Your technician license could get you going on 10 meters and some of the other bands on CW, but of course you probably want to be thinking about a general license class if you're going to get involved in the HF piece. Here's my friend Steve, K7PX, typical HF SOTA setup. He's got a Elecraft KX2 there, and he's driving an end-fed antenna. And let's see, if it's Steve, it's probably CW. I don't think he gets on sideband much at all. There will be a discussion, a presentation by Scott, WA9STI, on this same YouTube channel, Zoom channel, on November 23rd. He's going to talk about HF in more detail. And I'm sure that'll be an interesting discussion. So how popular is VHF, UHF for SOTA? I kind of had my own impression, but I decided I needed data. So I went out and I looked at the SOTA database and pulled as much data as I could. And basically what I found is 80% of the SOTA QSOs are below 50 megahertz, 20% are above 50 megahertz in the VHF, UHF range. And it was pretty clear above 50 megahertz, 2 meter FM is the dominant band and mode. 90% of the QSOs are on 2 meters. And then the vast majority of those are on FM, for obvious reasons. It's like people just have the 2 meter FM equipment, right? It's so common. Whenever we get into, here's a little snippet out of my book here. We get into discussing VHF. People always think, it's line of sight only. I can only go so far with that signal, and that's not a bad way to think about it, especially if we compare it to HF. But actually, VHF is often more than line of sight, and that's part of the thing I like. It's a little bit of a challenge to see what you can do that goes beyond. A lot of times we say, well, it's line of sight, so it's optical horizon, goes out a certain distance, and then we'll say, well, there's a radio horizon that goes a little bit further, maybe 15% as a rule of thumb. But what gets overlooked is, so we'll call that the line of sight region. What gets overlooked is beyond that, there's the non-line of sight region. And the arrows are drawn here with lighter dots, because the signal definitely is getting attenuated as it goes beyond the horizon, but it's still there. It's just pretty weak in a lot of cases. And if you optimize your station and put out a little bit more of a signal with a better antenna or whatever, you can take advantage of that non-line of sight region. Similar thing happens with mountains. A lot of times you think the signal will be blocked by a mountain, and it might be, but often a little bit of signal gets over the top. It may refract or diffract across the edge of that mountain, or it may just bounce off of some other mountain. I'm always amazed with my directional antenna. I've kind of trained myself to just point that in any old direction and see who I can work, because you never know what path is going to be most effective. Okay, so how do we do a VHF SOTA activation? Well, it can be pretty darn simple. And so I call this the take along a 2 meter handheld on a hike. Go out to some summit that's easy to climb, get up there. This one happens to be Kaufman Ridge High Point, 10,765 feet. Not too difficult to get to, and that's me operating my 2 meter handheld there, sort of parked in the tree. So you can certainly do that. I always tell people that your rubber duck antenna is a convenient, crappy antenna. It's really not very good. So the first thing you want to do is get something better. And I really like these half wave telescopic antennas that collapse down quite nicely and then telescope out without much difficulty to be a half wave. They work surprisingly well. This is the single band MFJ antenna. Recently discovered there's a dual band version out on Amazon. You just search for RH770, and I've tested these things and compared them to other antennas. They're actually pretty good, and they'll work on 2 meters and 70 centimeters. $17 delivered on Amazon Prime. Another antenna people like to use is the roll-up J-pole. That's also a half wave radiator, and it's got a quarter wave matching stub on it. You can build these yourself. You can buy them, and you just string it up in a tree, or maybe hang it from a fishing pole, something like that. They do a good job. So that's another way to get something better than your rubber duck. And then here's what I typically use for an antenna. That's a 3-element 2-meter Yagi from Arrow Antenna. And I've got several different models of these Yagis for different bands and such, but the one I usually take is that 3-element for 2 meters, and I usually just hand hold it, because setting up some kind of mast and trying to keep it mounted is a challenge, takes a lot of work. You probably end up with guy wires and stuff like that, and I just hold it in my hand. It's easy to point that way. Oh, here, of course, it's vertical for FM, so polarization is important here. So vertically for FM, I'll use the same antenna for a single sideband. I'll turn it horizontal. And then I was noticing that some guys were having trouble hearing me, and I could hear them just fine. I'm sitting there going, "Oh, I think I found the problem. I'm running a 5-watt HT, and they're sitting at home with a 50-watt mobile." And I said, "Okay, I need to run a little more power." So lately, this has kind of turned into our standard configuration as a small. This is a very compact mobile transceiver that Yaesu used to make, the FT90, and so I'll take that along, stick that in a fanny pack, and use that to drive that 3-element antenna. It's actually a quite effective station. Another thing I've used is the FT817. So whenever I want to run single sideband or CW, I'll take that radio along. This is me on top of Mount Herman. It's kind of in my backyard. It's a 9,000-foot summit that's pretty easy for us to get to, and so I went up there for the January VHF contest and worked 17 QSOs in about an hour using that FT817, driving that same 3-element Yagi. Now the 817 also has 6 meters in it, so I'll usually put up like a dipole antenna or maybe an end-fed half-wave for 6 meters and see what I can work there as well. That's another option. And the IC705 is another popular compact portable radio that can do, well, it kind of does everything, right? All the HF bands, and then 6 meters, 2 meters, 70 centimeters. Using my brilliant knowledge of economics, when it first came out, I said, I'm going to wait until the price comes down on the IC705, and I'll end up paying a couple $100 less than all those guys that ran out and bought it right away. Well, of course, what really happened was supply chain issues kept these things in short supply, and the price didn't come down. So finally, I just went and bought it. It's a great little radio. It's just so it's so neat how compact, and with the waterfall display and all that stuff built into a small form factor. Yeah, there's the back side of it. Usually I take an external battery along, which gives me 10 watts out of that radio. Speaking of batteries, I've really latched on to these Bioenno LifePo batteries, LFP, lithium iron phosphate. They do a really nice job. In particular, this one's a 4.5 amp hour, and it'll run that little FT90 transceiver for hours. And in fact, usually I can do a couple of SOTA activations before I recharge that battery. There's some of the specs on there. It weighs a pound. So, you know, when you start loading things into your backpack and hiking up these mountains, you start to pay attention to weight. It's pretty lightweight for what it does. Okay, we tend to talk about the activating part of SOTA. I think that's kind of where the action is, right? You're out there doing the hiking, putting the summit on the air and all that kind of stuff. But you got to have chasers too, and chasing is fun. Here's a picture of KX0R shack, and it's you know, why do people chase? Well, they have fun too, right? Maybe they used to be mountain climbers and they're not doing it so much anymore, but they still want to participate in what you're doing and be a part of it, even though they're sitting in their shack. A lot of these guys are activators as well, right? And so they're doing both, but it's a lot of fun, lots of awards you can go after chasing as well. Yeah, so you know, a lot of the examples I've shown are FM gear. In fact, you know, I said the most common mode on VHF is 2 meters FM, and it's kind of too bad because it's well known that FM performs poorly at weak signal levels, right, compared to just about anything else. But the dual band HT is just so universal. That's what people have, and then they, you know, their station at home is, if they have a VHF station, it probably includes 2 meter FM. They may not have single sideband, and so so most of the activity is going to be on FM, and then there are times when SSB and CW come into play, and that's mostly VHF contests, or in some cases I'll make a schedule with someone and we'll plan in advance to use single sideband to get that advantage from that modulation type. So let's talk a little bit about VHF radio contesting, because it actually plays pretty well with SOTA. You know, why do people do contesting in general? Well, they like the competition, they like the challenge. Particularly on VHF, it concentrates activity. It gets people to get on the air on a particular weekend, and people are on the air because people are on the air, right? It's activity concentrator. And then for SOTA, it means more activity on more bands and modes. And so it's a good thing to try out. The contest format, of course, is all ham bands above 50 megahertz. 6 meters, 2 meters, 70 centimeters are going to be most popular. And you try and work everybody you can on every band, and your score are QSO points times the number of grids worked. And you can see all the ham bands listed there, all the popular ones anyway. You do need to know your grid locator. I think most people are familiar with these days. The world's divided up into the Maidenhead grid system. Like here's a slice at Colorado. I live in Delta Mike 79, so that's going to be my grid. Includes most of Denver. Colorado Springs is DM78 and so forth. But if we go up in the mountains, we might be in a little bit rarer grid, might be in DM69 or DM68. There's not as much activity over there. The major contests, of course, are the 3 ARL contests, January, June, and September. And then CQ sponsors a contest in July. That's a lot of fun as well. So this past June, I said, okay, I'm gonna try this SOTA plus VHF contest thing. In fact, I said, well, the summit I was going to go up to is Pikes Peak, and Pikes Peak happens to be in a park. So it's actually it was SOTA, Parks on the Air, and VHF contest. But you can see I've got a couple of Yagi antennas set up. One of them's on the camera tripod I had. It's configured vertically right in this picture, and then I'm holding a 70 centimeter Yagi, 5-element Yagi, and there's a couple other antennas laying there. I'm using the IC 705 so I could do all the different modes. And then here's the results I had. And this was from maybe 3 or 4 hours of operation. Made a bunch of contacts on 6 meters, 2 meters, couple on 222 megahertz, and as well as 70 centimeters and 23 centimeters, 1296. Actually worked a guy up in Wyoming, which was quite some distance away on 1296. And this was a mix of FM contacts and single sideband contacts. So some of the folks were pretty much SOTA chasers and some were VHF contesters, and we just kind of worked them all. Now, this really isn't a great VHF contest score. It's only a couple thousand points, so it's not gonna be earth shaking from that standpoint. But for a SOTA activation, 80 QSOs in a few hours on VHF and higher is pretty good. I was happy with this. Okay, so when you get back down the mountain, or if you're sitting at home chasing, you do need to submit a log. And there's a couple of different ways to do that. Some folks like to use paper logs, right? Especially you're out on some mountain and the wind's blowing and maybe it starts to snow or whatever, and just quickly logging contacts on paper may actually be a better way to go than trying to mess around with an electronic device. And then of course, once you get back home, you'll need to transcribe that into some kind of electronic format and get it into the SOTA database. So this is the SOTA website where you can do that. You can see I've selected, okay, I'm in the Colorado Association, Front Range region, Pikes Peak. Here's my call sign. And I start entering these, the stations that I work, just like a normal logbook. And so that's one way to do it. It works pretty well. Another popular approach is logging programs, and some of these have been developed that are tuned for SOTA specifically. So this one by Stewart, K0LGS, is really good. It's called SOTA Log Editor, and it knows about the different SOTA summits, and you can go in and put your SOTA reference in there, and it'll tell you what summit that is, and it just does a really nice job of creating a file, and then you take that file and upload it into the SOTA website. So it's a lot more efficient that way, I think. And then another program that has gotten pretty popular is HAMRS, or people just call it Hammers. And the cool thing about this one is it also has templates. It has a template for SOTA activations. It also has one for POTA, if you're into that. And so it's handy for entering SOTA logs. But the really cool thing about it is it runs on pretty much any compute platform. So I'll run that under Windows on my computer at home. I'll run it on my wife's iPad. It'll run on Android. It'll run on my iPhone, and so it's highly portable across compute platforms. So that's pretty sweet. Another piece of infrastructure we have is called SOTA Watch. It's basically a SOTA spotting program, online online system, and there obviously you go out and you spot people that are on the air for SOTA, and it's accepted practice to go ahead and spot yourself. You know, some situations that's frowned upon, right? But for SOTA activations, it's accepted, and it actually has two concepts. One is an alert. You post an alert to basically say, hey, I'm going to be out on this mountain at this particular time and on these particular bands, and kind of gives people a heads up that you're going to be out. And then once you get on the summit and you're actually on the air, then you go ahead and have somebody spot you, or go ahead and spot yourself. And this is extremely useful for making you know, knowing who's out there, who's ready to make contacts. There's also some smartphone apps that access the same system. The one I use is SOTA Goat. It is it's an iPhone app, but there are also similar apps for Android. And so you take that into the field with you. I'd say 80% of the time I've got cell phone coverage, so I can use it while I'm actually on the summit. Yeah, I mentioned Pikes Peak is in a park. A lot of summits are in parks. If you look at the Parks on the Air program, you know, they basically have included national parks, national forests, everything at the national level that falls into that category, and then also at the state level, so state parks, state forests, state recreation areas, that sort of thing. And so these two things play pretty well together. I'd say 3/4 of the summits I'm on are in a national forest or a national park or some such thing. The programs are pretty similar. Of course, POTA is going to be focused on parks, not summits. It's not as much hiking oriented. It's really it includes, from that standpoint, it's more inclusive, I think. It includes hiking. You can be in your vehicle. You can be camping. It's very flexible. You can use any power source. Vehicle operation is okay. That's fine. And then the main difference in challenge is you need to have 10 QSOs for a successful activation. So, so you need to be thinking about cranking up at least 10, which is not usually a big problem. But anyway, so that's something something that some of the SOTA activators are starting to do is going ahead and combining in POTA and SOTA in one. So VHF SOTA. So how far can you go with this stuff? So here's a typical operation. That's my wife Joyce, K0JJW. She's pretty much always with me on these activations, and it's really a joint activation. And the photo shows it pretty well. Usually one of us is holding the antenna, and she's talking on that Yaesu mobile radio, which is stuffed into the fanny pack that I have. And she's holding a small clipboard, so she's actually doing the logging. That's one thing about holding that Yagi antenna. Operating and logging and pointing the antenna can be a challenge if it's one person by yourself. So what works out for us is we'll sort of take turns on those jobs. So we have four sets of hands available, and so it works for us. So here's an activation I did a number of times now from Pikes Peak. Pikes Peak is 14,000 feet, right? It's a 14er, and the highest spot in Kansas is called Mount Sunflower. Not quite as tall, 4,039 feet. It's basically just a little. You see the little marker there out in the middle of a farmer's field, and he leaves it publicly accessible. And so if you're ever driving across Kansas, you want something to see, you can go stop and see Mount Sunflower. And you may not be aware of Colorado's geography, but you think of Colorado has lots of mountains, which is certainly true. Well, we've got lots of plains too. And so Pikes Peak is in an interesting spot. It towers over Colorado Springs and has an excellent radio horizon out to the east. And so I've been up there a number of times, and if there's somebody at Mount Sunflower, I can easily work them on 2-meter FM. It's not very difficult at all. And that's 163 miles, and that is beyond line of sight. Line of sight probably stops around 120 or something like that. So that's a good example of what you can do. Another mountain I wanted to activate is called Capulan Mountain, and it's in northeastern New Mexico. 8,000 feet, as you might guess. It's a dormant volcano. You can see the crater there, and in the picture you can see the road sort of circles around the crater. You can drive up to the rim, and then you have to hike a ways up to the actual summit. And I really wanted to activate that on VHF, but it's just a long way from anywhere. And I was really concerned that I'm going to get out there and there just won't be anybody to work, because it's pretty deserty out there without much population. And so I put the word out. Yeah, here's where it is. This is the northeast corner of New Mexico, and the mountain is right there. This is Colorado up here. And so it's quite some distance, like up to Colorado Springs, where there would be people. And then down to the southwest is Albuquerque and Santa Fe, also quite some distance. So I put the word out. I said, hey, I'm going to be doing this activation. I'm going to be on 2 meters single sideband at this point in time, and basically pass the word among the guys that have significant VHF stations that can do single sideband and CW, and it worked. It turned out quite a few guys got on the air. My best contact that day was down to just north of Albuquerque, N7KA. He was 184 miles away. I was running the FT817 to the 5 watts to that 3-element Yagi. He had a larger Yagi, and I think he was running maybe 150 or 200 watts. He had some power. And so guess what? I could hear him pretty well. He was not hearing me so good on single sideband. So as we often do on VHF, if you can't make it on single sideband, you just flip over to CW and see if you can get enough of a signal through to make the contact. And that's what we did. So I worked him on CW that day at 184 miles. I was pretty happy with that. And I ended up working a bunch of guys up into the Denver and Colorado Springs area. So it was a good day. Short time after that, I was wandering across Oklahoma, and you think, well, Oklahoma doesn't have any mountains. No, actually, Oklahoma has quite a few mountains. They've got the Wichita Mountains, and there's one with a road to the top called Mount Scott. And so we were kind of passing through, and I said, hey, we can make a quick trip up there and see who we can work from Mount Scott. So we did that. Again, it had the 3-element Yagi and the FT90. I had it set on 25 watts. And I just made a call on 146.52. And this guy comes back to me from Texas. And Texas is, depending on where you're at in Texas, that's not necessarily very far away, right? You see where Mount Scott is here. It's southwest of Oklahoma City. And so he told me his location, and I wrote all that down. I was pretty pleased. And then later I looked up where it was. It was Brownfield, Texas, 245 miles away. That was, at that point in time, was my best 2-meter contact with SOTA. and that's well beyond line of sight. And I think it was early in the morning. I think there was probably a little bit of tropo ducting going on that helped us that day. And then fast forward to, let's see, January of 21, I was decided to do the VHF contest SOTA POTA thing again. And this time is on 3 Mile Mountain. It's not that huge of a mountain. It's 10,000 feet tall. It's in Pike National Forest. And it's maybe what, 60 or 80 miles west of Pikes Peak. So it sits back into the mountains quite a ways. So I wasn't expecting outstanding things that day, but we got on the air, making a bunch of contacts, having fun, working a bunch of guys up in Denver and so forth on 2 meters and well, all the VHF, UHF bands. And if you look carefully there, that radio that's actually an FT991, which is kind of big for backpacking, but this summit wasn't too much of a hike. So I loaded up kind of some extra gear to get up to take with me up there. Anyway, all of a sudden I hear this station from Kansas calling, N0LL, pretty well-known VHF contester over there, and he's calling me, and he's like really strong. I couldn't believe it. He was like S7 coming in, and so I worked him on single sideband at a distance of 372 miles. So in this case, we didn't have Pikes Peak sort of poking its head up over the plains. It was more like 3 Mile Mountain set back into the mountains. I had to get over the mountains like Pikes Peak and get out onto the plains and work Larry over here in Kansas. But it worked quite well. I was pretty pleased with that. Okay, so somewhere a few years ago, I started thinking about, well, 2 meters is good, 70 centimeters is good. What can we do that's maybe a little more interesting and challenging? And I noticed some of the SOTA guys were starting to operate 1.2 gigahertz or 23 centimeters. And it is considered a microwave band for SOTA. So there's some special awards and stuff you can go after if you're into that stuff. So I said, okay, maybe I should do that. And what people were latching onto, it's like the cheapest way to get on 1.2 gig is the Alinco DJ G7T handheld transceiver. It used to be about $240. It's up to $270 now with inflation, and it'll put out 1 watt on 23 centimeters. And so then I also bought the Yagi in the picture there is a Comet 16 element Yagi with over 16 dB of gain. And so that's kind of my go-to 1.2 gig station. Some other gear that's available. I did end up picking up one of these transceivers. Nobody makes these anymore. Kenwood and ICOM used to make single band FM transceivers for 1.2 gig, and I found one of those on eBay. It runs 10 watts. So I got that to have a little more punch. And there's all kinds of antennas out there you can get. A lot of them are from China of questionable quality. Here's a PC board antenna that WA5 VJB makes. It's a I guess a 3-element Yagi antenna kind of built into a PC board. It actually works. I've checked that out, used that some. And so every year in Colorado, we've got this Colorado 14er event where it's really just a SOTA activity weekend for us. And so I was talking to one of the other guys that had an interest in 1.2 gig, and we worked out that hey, let's get on the air on a particular day and see if we can make this contact. And I went up Mount Evans, so I took the easy one. You can you can drive most of the way up, and then there's a short hike to the actual summit. David, W0ADV, was down here on Sunshine Peak, also 14,000 foot mountain. He had a serious climb to get in there. And so we tried, we worked on 2 meters and made it that way. And then we switched over to 1.2 gig. And sure enough, we just barely completed the contact at 152 miles, because this path is going through several mountain ranges. It was not a very, very clean path. And this was what it looked like from David's end. That's him holding his 23 centimeter Yagi. He said he found that if he pointed right at that notch, that was the best spot. So there must have been something about how the signal made it through that notch or refracted through it or whatnot. And then here's a picture of him standing on that mountain. You can see he's well above tree line. And so then, I was super excited about that. David and I both our best effort on 1.2 gig. So then we're going, well, what's next? And I thought, gosh, what am I going to do for 2022? And I was trying to figure out, you sort of have to come up with 2 summits that are far enough apart to be a longer distance than I'd done before, but still close enough that we can do it. And I was just coming up short, and frankly, I didn't have anybody that wanted to be on the other summit. So then I started thinking about, well, I'll go up Pikes Peak or Mount Evans or one of those, and I'll point to the east. Who can I work out to the east? And started asking around, and I found that N0OY, Pete, over in Salina, Kansas, has a formidable 23 centimeter station at 392 miles away. And I thought, oh man, that's a long haul. Not going to do that on FM. I'm going to have to come up with some single sideband equipment. So I took I took my IC 9700 up to Pikes Peak to do this. Here's a picture of Pete's station in N0OY. I think you can call that an antenna farm. That's a pretty impressive bunch of metal up in the air. And then this is his dish. I think it's a 9-foot dish for 23 centimeters. And this is me sitting on Pikes Peak. Still got my Comet Yagi. And then there's the IC 9700. I ran it off one of those Bioenno batteries. And so as I'm talking to Pete about this, he says, we should start on CW. And I go, yeah, that's a good idea. So once I got into position, I sent him a text message. I said, give me a call. And so he started calling on CW. And sure enough, I could hear him right away, pretty clearly, but he was not very much above the noise. And so, he'd send his transmission calling me, and I'd reply. And I could tell that he heard me, but he really wasn't copying it enough to be a contact. So he kept, he'd send, I'd send back, send. Eventually the path got just a little bit better, probably a dB or 2, and he was able to copy my information, my grid location. And so we completed the contact on CW. We never did try single sideband. It was so weak, we didn't think we had a chance with it. So that is now my best 23 centimeters, 292 miles. So that raises the next question: what's next? I don't know what we're going to do next on that band. Don't have any great ideas. Okay, so let me kind of wrap up here, and we'll take questions in a minute. But so So there's a few operating tips for VHF SOTA. You know, when you get on the air, you're probably going to be using 2-meter FM. You probably want to use the calling frequency. Everybody knows it's 146.52. You'll be surprised who shows up on 146.52 in some of these places. A lot of people that live up in the mountains or camp up there or whatever just make it a habit to listen on 5.2, and so you make a call, they'll typically come back to you. We've also, the SOTA community's also been promoting this idea of a North America adventure frequency, which is 146.58. It's kind of like the other calling frequency. So if you're in a place where 5.2 gets used a lot and you don't want to be hogging it all the time, then you go over to 5.8. But you do need to make some calls. Sometimes people get on there and go, this is K0NR SOTA activator, and they hope, you know, somebody's going to call them. Well, that's not going to work. You got to make some noise. So typically, you know, I'm going to do something like CQ, this is Kilo 0 November Romeo K0NR on the summit of Pikes Peak. Summit's on the air, looking for anybody anywhere. You know, a little bit of a sales pitch there. It's important to let people know when you're going to be out. So this kind of depends on your situation, but like if I'm going to be within range of our local radio club, I'll drop them an email and say, hey, I'm going to be such mountain. If you want to try and work me on Friday afternoon at this time or whatever, put an alert out on SOTA Watch so people know you're going to do it. In some cases, I'll go ahead and set schedules with specific operators. So, you know, working N0OY over in Kansas, that was not going to happen by randomly calling, right? We had to agree on a frequency, a time, a mode, and we really had a plan, right, to make that contact happen. And even then, it almost didn't happen. So set a schedule with some folks. Especially when you're newer at this, operate close enough to population centers. So like in Colorado, if you get on a mountaintop that is within like optical visual sight of any of the big cities, Denver, Colorado Springs, or whatever, you'll have no trouble making a bunch of contacts on 2-meter FM simplex. If you're way the heck on the western side of the state, there's the population density is a lot lower, and so you may struggle over there. In fact, that's one thing that happens is people go out to these remote areas with VHF, and they maybe don't have that big of a signal to start with, and you can get skunked out there. You can end up with no contacts. And then finally, that last idea of operate during VHF contests, because you know the contesters are going to be on the air, and they'll work everybody, and they'll use single sideband and CW. Maybe even FT8 is getting a lot more popular on 6 meters in particular. Here's a few resources. The SOTA website, already mentioned that. There is this thing called SOTA Atlas. It's kind of a weird URL. It is SOTL.AS. That is really handy. You can zoom in and zoom out, and they'll show you where all the SOTA peaks are. And you can search, you can filter, like if you're trying to find a peak you can get to, you search for a summit that's had lots of activations. You know, if it's had 50 activations, then probably it's pretty easy to get to. So do things like that. And then the last thing is most SOTA associations, regions, have their own little electronic email list on groups.io. So like there's one for Colorado where all the Colorado SOTA guys hang out and they share information. There's one down in New Mexico. There's ones in California. So just search for that on groups.io for your particular state or location. Okay, and I think that's it. It was about 55 minutes. So how about we take questions?
Hang on, I'm trying to unlighten you. Okay, got you off the spotlight thing. Now
Okay.
we see who's talking. We got a hand up and got a few in the chat.
Okay.
Victor, go ahead. You got your hand up. Victor, Victor, Victor. There you go.
Mute button first. Got to find the mute button first. Thank you very much. Sort of a question, but not really. Did want to announce that I made my first aviation contact today after 5 years with my ticket. But I'm disabled, so I certainly understand and have a lot of respect for those operators who are disabled and have nothing better to do than sit around and chase all day long. It's certainly an adventure. And I don't know if this operator is disabled or not my business, but I'm intrigued that the all bands leader presently has 17,000 contacts for the year. That's 56 a day at 7 per hour for 8 hours a day. And I'm thinking, depending on the range, and I didn't look up what country he was in, but finding 56 activators a day seems pretty solid. I don't know if he works every day or just a very, very busy weekend, but I think to your point about activations and the popularity of this, it just shows that SOTA is a robust radio sport. And kind of part of that is I'm in an apartment working in HT, and often I'll climb the hill behind me, and I'm running from one side of the building to the other, depending on who's activating where. And I'll tell you, sometimes I think I get more exercise than the guys that hike in 2 miles to do their activations. So just thought I'd throw those comments out. It's a lot of fun. It's great if you haven't done it. And it's certainly a way to, make contact with people and keep you on their voice active. Thanks. Have a great week.
All right. Thank you. Bob, can you lower your desktop sharing?
Oh, sure.
That helps see more and more here. Okay, I want to see more hands up and over in the chat thing. Earlier on when you were talking about walkie-talkie antennas and that kind of stuff, Tom had a question about with a half-wave antenna, would you benefit from using a dipple whip? It's a tiger, it's often called a tiger's tail.
Yeah, good question. In fact, so for, I don't know if maybe not everybody knows what the tiger tail is. One way to improve your HT's antenna performance, even with the rubber duck, is to hang a wire off the shell of the antenna connection, about a 19-inch wire, quarter wave on 2 meters, and it basically gives a counterpoise to your rubber duck antenna. And so a lot of guys like those as a way to improve their HT antenna, but that's not useful on the half wave. The beauty of the half wave is it's got that full half wavelength, so, and it's got a matching transformer on the end. So I don't think you're going to see much improvement adding a tiger tail to that.
Okay, well, I forgot I have my camera on. I'm running around here. Diane, you got your hand up. Go ahead.
Okay. Just going to see if I can, trying to get my video on, but excuse me, Bob, it's not starting. Well, it is now. Great.
Yeah.
I do a lot of SOTA POTA, love it on HF, never did any on 2 meters, and you gave me enough information now that I can actually go out and try it with the things that I have. Really appreciate that. It looks like a lot of fun and a good addition. So thank you.
Yeah, definitely consider that. Now, so let's expand on that a little bit. The thing I've noticed is there's a small number of people like me that say, I really want to do VHF, and I've done some HF SOTA, but really I focus on VHF. height above average terrain, blah, 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 all that stuff. What a lot of people do is they start out doing that and then they go, okay, I want more. I'm not making enough contacts or whatever. And I want to work, distance stations. So they sort of migrate to HF. And some of them kind of leave VHF behind, but then there's quite a few that do both. And so they drag along the HT and maybe that half wave antenna or something simple. And they'll before they set up for HF, they'll make quick VHF contacts who they can find locally. Don't spend much time on it, but okay, I'm going to work over here, and now okay, I'm going to go get on HF, and so it's a best of both worlds kind of thing.
Yeah, it looks like a lot of fun. And like I said, another new addition for me. And actually, my first radio contacts were up on Mount Diablo. And I ended up getting between 150 and 200 miles in, let's see, north, east, and south directions on that mountain. So that was pretty exciting for me, being a new radio operator, and that was years ago. So, well, not that many years ago, but it got a friend really interested in ham radio because of those contacts. So I just go back to adding that back into my repertoire. Thank you.
Yep.
There you go. Well, I don't know how much royalties you get off your book, but I just bought your book, so you're that much richer.
Good. I'm not going to fund my retirement off of that book, but every bit helps, right?
Well, there aren't many books out there, I noticed. You got one of the main books out there to choose from. Okay, is there
Okay, thank you.
is there anybody else? Who we got going on here in chat? I'm used to Barry being here. He keeps me on my toes with chat. And Bob K7MHJ over in Washington, he wants to know the name of your login software you mentioned. Are you going to send me your slide pack after this presentation?
Gave it to Anthony. I think he
Yeah,
probably already has it out on Dropbox.
No, he did. He sent me an email. It's already posted out there, so I'll get it out there. I'll get that out there to everybody. You can get the details off of that. Another one here from N6JED. How do you get your antennas up on their mountains?
Yeah, so the reason I use that 3-element Yagi so much is that I guess I didn't have a picture of it collapse, but those elements are basically arrow shafts, like bow and arrow shafts, and so they're threaded, and so they unscrew, and the boom itself is in two pieces, and it pulls apart, and that whole antenna collapses down to be maybe 30 inches long and kind of a couple inches, 3 inches in diameter. And I shove that in my pack. So it's quite easy to carry. And I've been looking for bigger antennas because, bigger is better, right? But you've got this trade-off between how much time you spend futzing around assembling antennas and the amount of weight that ends up in your pack and that kind of thing. So I've just kind of always stuck with that 3-element. It's got 6 dB of gain relative to a dipole, and that makes a difference. And but yet it's not too heavy. It's not too clumsy.
It works. That's what's important. It works for you.
Yeah, it works. Yeah.
Okay. Looks like Rob, K7ZBE, and I'm not sure if that's a question or what is. You want to tell us, Bob, what you got to go in there?
Actually, I was trying to answer somebody else was asking a question.
Yeah, he was the yeah, the two logging programs I talked about, one was HAM-RS, HAM-RS, and the other one was, I guess they just call it SOTA Editor by Stewart, G0 LGS, I think was the call sign.
Okay, yeah, I see it there now. That's why I rely upon Barry. Barry's not with me, so stand by for all my oversights here. I don't see any more hands. I don't see any more questions.